All right, guys, so this is for the salesperson who's invested in their customer's journey and leveraging the customer's evolving needs into expansion opportunities. So today we got Corey Purves, who's an account development representative at PandaDoc, finds expansion opportunities with current customers. Corey's actually one of my best friends, even though I always smoke him and will be the show every single time, but we're happy to have him on. So Corey, if you can give us a quick story where you came from and how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give the higher level overview. So I originally started out in a program called Praxis. I think that's where my whole career kind of began. So I think you've had other people on here that went through Praxis, and I know Brandy did as well. But went through Praxis. It's like a business development program, boot camp for people who are interested in careers in sales, marketing, operations, customer success at startups. So, getting your real life experience in a startup and eventually being able to go on and grow with that startup in, non-tech roles. So I went through that program and eventually I got hired by Praxis, the boot camp, to do some like business development and just work with like our participants, helping them get placed at startups. So I went on to do that for about 6 months to move from New Jersey to Charleston, South Carolina, where our headquarters was at the time. And I was there for about 6 months. And then I decided I ended up getting a job opportunity at PandaDoc to be a lead development representative. And I ended up taking that and moving from Charleston to where I am now in St. Petersburg, Florida, and working with PandaDoc. I don't know if you want me to go into like how I got into this role yet, or but that's how I
Yeah.
got into PandaDoc.
Yeah, go for it. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so I was a lead development representative for about 6 months at PandaDoc. So, my responsibilities were like working a lot of our content leads, more like top of the funnel stuff, and trying to develop those into opportunities for our account executives to eventually close that business. So a lot of just getting my feet wet in the sales world, making cold calls, getting familiar with all the different tools that we use, Salesloft, Salesforce, and just trying to learn as much as I could in the beginning to eventually grow into another role, which is what I did. Kind of funny how it all like came about, because one of my coworkers, as you know, Nick, he kind of trailblazed this like experimental role that I'm in now, and I got into that about 6 months ago. Actually, trying to source opportunities within our current customer base and just utilizing that to the best we can to make sure our customers are getting the most out of PandaDoc. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've, worked 2 different startups, kind of similar positions. I'm curious to know what were the like, if you could high level, what were the similarities and the differences in the transition from Praxis and working on biz dev to like LDR, ADR role at PandaDoc? Did you have any of the same duties, or was it just completely different because they're different startups? Like, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so there are definitely some similarities, but then again, like a lot of differences as well. Because Praxis is a lot smaller company. At the time, we were like 10 employees, something like that, and it was kind of a role that was still kind of being developed, and there wasn't there weren't many processes in place. Um, so it was very much so like the startup world, as you would think of it at a really small company. Um, so, but as far as like similarities of the LDR role, I was doing like cold outreach to other startups that were, like hiring for entry level roles, kind of like a recruiter as some sort. Um, so a lot of cold outreach, which is what I did as an LDR as well. I would say like at Praxis, I had to be a lot more scrappy and stuff in what I did because I didn't have as many resources as I did at PandaDoc as far as like tools to use and everything like that. Really didn't do much cold calling at all at Praxis. I was more so just all like cold emails and a little bit of LinkedIn and stuff like that. So definitely had to try to be more creative, I guess, in that role because there were just less processes and it was a smaller company, which is what you get with that. But definitely learned a lot.
So Corey, can you give just like a brief explanation of what the ADR role is, and then kind of talk about like specifically what you do and maybe some advice you have for people that are in a similar position that are trying to build expansion pipeline?
Yeah, so I guess what I do, it's, I mean, of course, it's still developing because it's like a more experimental role, but sort of like I I work a lot in like Salesforce, of course, because that's where all our customers live. And I do a lot of, like research in there to look for indicators into like accounts that I think would have some potential for expansion, whether that be like upgrading their plan or, going into a different team within their organization, um, anything like that. Um, and we run a lot of different plays into, um, we're running plays like all the time that have, different goals. So sometimes we'll just be running plays into accounts that we don't really have a relationship with, and just trying to get a relationship established and seeing if there's potential. Um, and other times we'll run like, uh, upgrades for like plans and letting customers know how they can benefit from, being on a higher tier plan or utilizing other features like our API or something like that. But a lot of it is sort of that research element and again like being very scrappy with accounts and trying to find, like gold, and going after it. And also like working with our account managers a lot, to support them the best we can to create that pipeline for expansion and for them to eventually close. Um, so that's like a higher level overview of the role. Um, and then as far as like advice for people, um, doing similar things. I think the biggest thing is just like being willing to, like, I think this goes for sales in general, but just being willing to try different things and just figure things out as you go because um, ultimately, like, that's what I found that I have to do in this role, constantly like changing the way we do things, constantly like running different plays like I said, building different kinds of reports in Salesforce that make my life easier to find these accounts, and I think just trying to utilize your time the best you can, and ultimately like don't be afraid to go sort of like outbound into say like franchises or something like that where you know that there's potential and you already have some leverage within your current base to do that with other say locations or something out there. So yeah, That would be my advice.
How often would you say that now you describe the situation of sometimes you're reaching out to current customers who we don't have a relationship with versus those who do. What would you say the ratio of those two are? And let's start there.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to quantify, but I would say we are getting a lot better at that now, as far as like customers coming in and like originally closing with our AE, and then that handoff process into the AM and CSM. I think that process is a lot more fleshed out now than it was before. So I don't think we see like relationships not being established now with like new accounts coming in, but in the past that definitely was the case. And of course, like customers that self-serve on our website, which is just like buying without going through the sales process, um, they won't have we won't have relationships established with them, of course, because like we don't know that they're like buying PandaDoc because we're not involved in the process. um, but I would say like there's another thing that kind of like ties in with this is that like our customer base, um, like we've always specialized in like SMB, and a lot of our customer base is still like smaller size companies. And I know like we're moving up market now, but we see like a lot of 11 to 50 company size, a lot of 2 to 10, and then we have a good amount of 51 to 200 as well. So I think since our customer base has a lot of like smaller size companies, we don't have a lot of relationships established with those, and I think that's something that I'm trying to work on as well, and sort of seeing if we can like maximize those company sizes, because obviously they are smaller, so there's less room to grow, but there also could be a good amount of room to actually grow with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And how does your mindset or approach change from the cold calls you used to do to now building those relationships, whether pre-existing or not? You mentioned that you research in Salesforce. I'm assuming that means that you sort of track their history and the notes and things, but like, how do you begin to go about starting that conversation with current customers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think like in the past, of course, like cold calling is a lot different than this, because they don't know cold calling, like they don't know anything about PandaDoc. Maybe they know a little bit. Um, but in sort of this situation with current customers, I think you have to like your outreach has to be like tailored towards them and towards them benefiting from you, if that makes sense. So like giving them value into what like want to talk to them about, or something along those lines. Like some of the plays we ran is like an intro to their account manager, and just not like trying to sell them at all, but just saying like, we want to introduce you to your account manager, so you can get the most out of PandaDoc, see if we can help you at all with your work, anything like that. So it's a lot more of having like a customer centric like approach to your outreach, and um, making sure they know the value that they're going to get out of it, and not like um, not as much like pulling pain out of customers, because we already know their use case a lot of the time, and we already know what they're using PandaDoc for. So I think it's a lot of just showing what our value can be to them, and trying to get them to want to actually have a relationship with us. So I think that's like the biggest thing you have to focus on here.
Yeah, definitely. I got another question for you, Corey. I know you're pretty new in your career. come out of practice. You're in your second role now, well, second company, I should say. We worked side by side for months, literally sat next to each other. Never forget that because of the endless Jolly Rancher supply. But
Yes.
could you tell us about any type of failure you feel like you've had in your career and how you overcame that?
Yeah. So I think like first starting at PandaDoc, like my first month or so, going into like the LDR role and like making these cold calls and stuff like that. I started with Jed Marley, which I know you guys had on here as well. Um, and we started at the same time. So I think like my first month or so was pretty tough on me, just like getting used to like making cold calls and stuff. Like, because like I never thought that I would go into sales at all. And I was never a huge fan of like cold calling. So it was like honestly really uncomfortable for me, like starting out. And something that I kind of had to overcome was actually just like putting my head down and making those calls to these potential customers. So I think that my first month or so, I had a pretty slow start and I was pretty like down about my performance and stuff. So I think overall, like that was probably one of my bigger failures, and I just had to like come to my senses and be like, this is what I have to do, and like I have to do this now, or else like I'm not going to grow at all from this if I just sit back and let things roll without me doing anything about it. So ultimately, like that's what I had to do, and I definitely grew a lot from that and became a lot more comfortable um, with sales in general.
Yeah, definitely. I think cold callings can be very difficult. I know, Brandy, you're in your first sales role, and it's hard to get in a groove. Um, Even if you've done cold calling before and you go to a new company and do it, it's different. And I think it's very humbling, whether you go to an inbound role, closing role, or get out of sales at all. Just being able to get in a rhythm of cold calling and getting good at it is, I think, a very valuable skill. So it's good that you recognize that that's kind of what you had to do to, dig yourself out of the trenches and start your career. But
Yeah.
um, it definitely panned out well for you. So that's good.
Yeah, Corey, I feel the same. When I started making cold calls, it was hard because I wanted to make a lot of dials. Um, I knew that was at least something that I could hold up and say, look, like I have this metric. Even if I sucked on the phone, like at least I made this number of dials. And the more you just learn to incorporate it into your day and make it a routine or a habit, like the less that the nerves sort of come along with the fact that you have to pick up the phone, and then it's sort of, yeah, you find your groove, you pick the talk track for the hour and you just roll with it, and whatever happens happens. But there's only so much you can actually control in that situation besides just, yeah, putting your head down and doing the work.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it made you a lot stronger.
Yeah, I think too, like the funny thing with like just like calling in general is like it's so much like the first call, like getting to the first call and like actually like picking up the phone and like starting with that cadence step or whatever. And once you like get through one or two calls, you're like, oh, like this isn't bad, like I can do this. But I think it's just like the mentality of actually getting to it and just doing it, which is like the hardest thing I think for people.
Yeah. So can you tell us about one success that you've had since the beginning of your career that sticks with you?
Yeah. I think like I just think of like my my career in general, like getting started at 19, which like I didn't foresee ever happening in my life. And I think that's what like I automatically think of. And I think like I forget that a lot, that I'm so young. And I think I kind of discredit myself sometimes because I automatically think like, oh, I need to like grow more and do more. But then I realize that I'm only 20 right now, and I have a lot of time in my career to do things. So I think like just like getting started in general. But I guess like specifically, um, just like transitioning into this role at PandaDoc. Um, I think I originally like started actually doing things in March, and kind of just like went for it and tried to learn as much as I could. And I think that was a pretty big success for me. Just like taking this role that was kind of like trailblazed by one person and like trying to work with Nick and like just sort of like trailblazing it more, for lack of a better term. So I think overall, like I'd say like those two things were the biggest things that came to mind for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, we started at similar times. It was you, Jed, and then Nick started a little bit prior to that. And, all three of you are under the age of 21. And I think working with a lot of people that are in their mid 20s and late 20s that are in a really good spot can kind of put pressure on you a little bit. But it's good that you remember that, you are 20, and a lot of the people you graduated high school with still have another year or two to get a degree in college, who are going to end up likely in an entry level spot as well. So I think it's a good start to your career. And like you mentioned with praxis, you're learning valuable skills that I feel like guarantees you a job more than a degree might. And then, you look at people like Olivia, who, she did the praxis program, and within a few years at PandaDoc now, she's the team lead of the account management team, even though it's pretty much a director role, even though she doesn't have that title. You look at people like Reed, who's a successful account executive, and I can go on forever with that list. But because of what you learned there and getting that early jump in your career, you're eventually going to have a perspective of, wow, like I'm still young and I'm in such a great position right now. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if we're still doing this show in like 5 years, we should have a a check-in. Where's Corey
yeah,
at? VP of, CEO of.
yeah. Hopefully you're like too rich and just too busy to even come back on. But if you're not, we'll have you back on.
I don't think I'll ever come to that point in my life.
We'll see, man.
All right, Corey, I got one more question for you. What is one thing that anyone can do today, right now, to get better at sales?
Yeah, I think I've watched this podcast before, so I think everyone has pretty similar answers.
Ooh, a fan.
But yeah, but I think like just, I mean, of course, like doing it is the way that you're gonna fail and grow. Just like whether that be like getting on the phones or whatever. But I think like a big thing is just like when you get into that new role, or maybe you're not in a role yet, I think like just talking to other people that are in um, that role that you want to get in, or um, people that are more experienced in a sales role or whatever role in general. I think just like talking to them and like learning from them is a huge thing. And I know that's been a huge thing for me as well, just like working with um, our account managers and learning from them. just like coming into this and meeting with them weekly, and trying to work with them on things. I think that's been like the biggest thing for me as far as, like getting better and growing. Learn from the people that have more experience and that are better at sales or whatever role you're getting into, because I think ultimately like they're gonna be able to mentor you or at least give you advice. And I think even like if you're not in a role or you're not in a company, I think just, making connections on LinkedIn or whatever, people are happy to help. Like, I think many people would be surprised at how many people are willing to, help you grow in your career just by, being considerate and thoughtful with your message towards them. Just saying like, hey, like I know you're in this role. I'm really interested. I really want to learn more about, how you got here and your journey or whatever. I think, people love to talk about themselves, so people would be more than happy to, share with you. So I think that's the biggest thing, just learning from others. Yeah.
Definitely, man. I think too, at PandaDoc, we have a great team of people that are always willing to help you, no matter what level they're on. And I definitely encourage people that, if your organization's similar and you have people willing to help, take advantage of that. And then you pass it down to new people, or if they need help from you. And like Corey said, LinkedIn, there's a lot of people in there you can follow or add as a connection. But yeah, definitely, if you want to get better at a certain skill, go right to the source. So that's good advice, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's great
for sure.
advice for someone who's in a role or, like you said, not in a role. Anyone can start a LinkedIn and start to network. So, yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for sharing, Corey.
of course.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on today, man. It's got some good tips, and we're happy to see you keep growing.
Appreciate you having me.
Thanks, Cor.